Transcendentalism was a philosophical and literary movement that emerged in the early 19th century. Transcendentalism started in the early 1800s as a response to much focus on logical thinking and physical things. It valued personal intuition and experiences, believing people could understand themselves and the world of deeper ways. Nature was also seen as an important of spiritual and emotional growth. Transcendentalism was emerging in the 1820s and 1830s in the United States and was a philosophical and literary movement that rejected rationalism and materialism in favor of individual intuition, spiritual insight, and a deeper connection with nature. So, in this decade, transcendentalism grew in the United States as a reaction against logical and materialism. So, it was more focused on trusting personal feelings and connecting deeply with nature. This was influenced by European thinkers, and they encouraged self reliance and growth over following society rules. So, this was like leaders like Emerson and Thoreau that promoted these ideas. And with the rapidly growth of transcendentalism within the intellectual climate of early 19th century in America was led to a deeply influenced by the Unitarian Church, which rejected the rigid Calvinism doctrines of the predestination and original sin in favor of a more like optimistic view of human nature and reason. So transcendentalism started in the 19th centuries in America and was influenced also by the United Church. And the role that they played was more like a hopeful view of human nature. And it also grew in a response to industrialization, which many felt threatened, that was more like a personal freedom. And thinkers like Emerson and Thoreau encouraged living independently and finding deeper meaning outside of society. So, transcendentalism developed within the rich intellectual climate of New England, in this part where the Unitarian Church liberal theology encouraged independent thought and spiritual exploration. So, this means that transcendentalism developed in the New England where the Unitarian Church promoted all these ideas, and it was also mainly influenced by religious revivals and a desire to create a new, like, unique American culture. So the way that this function was, Emerson and Thoreau wanted to move away from Europe, all this idea that they had, and focus more on individualism and nature. Transcendentalism thrived in the intellectual circles of Boston and Concord, where writers, philosophers, and reformers gathered to discuss ideas of self reliance and spirituality and social progresses. So, all of these were people discussing ideas like self reliance, spirituality, and social changes. Publications like the Dial spread transcendentalist ideas and also affect education with figures like Bronson promoting new ways to teach that focuses on personal growth, and Emerson's essays led the groundwork of the moment. Although all the of the moment and all the ideas of the transcendentalism, Margaret Fuller, Bronson Alcott, and Elizabeth Palmer were key figures in the transcendentalist movement, which, contributing to its liberal, philosophical, and education impacts, led to like all new ideas to grow. And Fuller was an early feminist and editor of the Dial, so she advocated for women rights, and Alcott focused on more new teachings method, while Peabody helped spread transcendentalist ideas and supported education reforms. And all these people were really important, and they together share and spread all the literature and philosophical and social changes that led to all these ideas of transcendentalism.
Transcendentalism emphasizes nature, individuality, and self-reflection. When compared to Puritanism, which viewed nature as dangerous and sinful, Transcendentalism sat as a source of inspiration and personal growth. Eastern philosophies, like Hinduism and Buddhism, also influenced Henry David Thoreau, encouraging simplicity, mindfulness, and harmony with the natural world. His ideas continue to shape modern environmental movements and inspire practices like minimalism and mindfulness. However, Henry David Thoreau's experiment at Walden also raises important sociological questions. His ability to live simply was influenced by privilege, and gender roles in the Transcendentalist movement often excluded women's voices. Today, his ideas connect to environmental justice and inspire modern movements focused on sustainable living and social equality.
Our second core principle of transcendentalism is the nature of divinity. Within this nature of divinity, we have the concept of the oversoul in Emerson's essay, The Oversoul, by the same name, published in 1841, describes a universal spiritual presence that connects all living things, such as in the Hindu concept of the Brahm, which is like a divine thing that connects all spirits, or the Buddhist notion of interconnectedness, which is when you meditate enough, you realize that you're one with everything and everything is one with you. We also have the manifestation of nature as a divine thing. The Walden, written and published in 1854, is a prime example of this philosophy. Henry spent 2 years living in a cabin near the Walden, seeking simplicity and spiritual clarity. He argued that deep observation of nature could lead to greater understanding of oneself and the universe itself. And also, transcendentalists loved to do symbolic interpretation of the natural world. They use nature as a metaphor for all spiritual truth. For example, changing seasons symbolize the cycle nature of human existence, as in division and centralization, highs and lows. And flowing river might represent time and the flow, just the flow of time, how it never stops. The movement reverence for nature laid the groundwork for basically environmentalist thought, influencing figures like famous John Muir and the American conservation movement. Our third core principle of transcendentalism is the social reforms it brought to this world. We had the famous educational reform. Transcendentalists believe in a progressive education system that encouraged critical thinking and creativity, and of course personal development, rather than memorization. Bronson Alcott, father of Little Women author Louise May Alcott, experimented with radical teaching methods such as engaging students in Socratic dialogue rather than strict discipline. We also had women's rights. Many transcendentalists were part of women's suffrage movements. Margaret Fuller, a leading transcendentalist and editor of The Dial, the movement's primary publication, was an early advocate for women's rights. Her book, Women in the 19th Century, published in 1845, argued that women should have the same intellectual and social freedoms as men. The abolition movement is also one of the many things they supported. Transcendentalists were vocal opponents of slavery. Throughout civil disobedience was written partly in response to the opposition to the Mexican-American War, which he saw as an expansion of slavery. Emerson also spoke out against slavery, and Transcendentalists participated in underground railroads, which basically freed slaves and did a lot. It was like an underground freedom network. Utopian communities also something they believed in. Some transcendentalists attempted to create the ideal societies, basically an utopia, embodied by their principles. The Brook Farm, founded in 1841, was one such experiment, where members lived cooperatively, focused on intellectual pursuits, and minimized material concerns. However, the community ultimately failed because they just didn't have enough finances to maintain themselves. The historical impact of all of this is these efforts helped shape the future progressive movements that would influence the 20th century in their later stages, influencing later social justice movements such as the push for black rights and women's suffrage. Our fourth core foundation of transcendentalism is philosophical foundations. We start with Platonic ideas. They drew from Plato that there was a higher world that was spiritual, and the physical world was merely a reflection of spiritual truth from the upper world. They also believed in Hindu and Buddhist texts, such as the Bhagavad Gita and Upanishads, that reinforced the belief in searching for a spiritual discovery. They also took a lot from romantic naturalism, as they believed nature was the inspiration and truth of all things, and they rejected the growing industrialization of the 19th century, seeing it as corruption of the divine work that was nature. All of these ideals of transcendentalism created the modern American individualism. The ideas of self-determination, personal freedom, and nonconformity are pretty well endowed and put and basically marked into the blood of the American culture. It continues to affect it even today. The historical impact of all of these is the modern world has been completely changed. We've seen multiple civil rights movements pop up, the rights of black men in the United States that also affected the rights of black men in, say, South Africa. We have women's suffrage that then spread all over the world. In conclusion, Transcendentalism evolved past just being a literary movement and then started to affect politics and civil rights and also marked how American ideals started to spread all over the planet.